You have no idea the self-control it took to not call this antastic beasts and how to ID them. I was told to play it with a straight bat. Bless. You keep me young, Steve, you really do. Oh, yes. Where was this? I needed this yesterday, you know. But there we go. We can put it on the drawing board. Anyway, ants in the UK, their identification and ecology. So for this, I will be talking about British ants. I'll be talking about how to ID them, some of the techniques that I would use to ID different ant species, and I'll go into a little bit about their ecology, as special request by some of the Rome people. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone in this talk. Okay, so a strong start. There we go. Ants are a massively successful and diverse group. We estimate that there are 22,000 species of ants across the globe. They are found on every single continent with the exception of Antarctica, where they're only found in the name, and a few Pacific islands in the Pacific. This is impressive, not necessarily because of how specious there are. 22,000 is nothing to sneeze at, but there are, I think, over 300,000 beetles. What's really impressive about these about ants is the incredible biomass they have. So Schultheis wrote a paper in 2022. It was estimated there are 20 quadrillion ants on the planet at any one time. That's a 10 with 15 zeros, I believe. So that's pretty impressive. Their biomass is estimated to be about 20% that of all humans on the planet, and equal to that, and maybe even greater, than all the wild birds and all the wild mammals put together. Very, very important, and they fulfill a range of ecological functions within this. We have ants that farm, that break down tough leafy matter, give it to fungi to break it down and fertilize the soils. We have ants that form these fantastic nests, weaver ants, which they actually take their larvae and use them as glue guns, which, yeah, well, we start to work early, which is good, I guess. We've got the honeypot ants in the center. These have a specialized worker called repletes to compensate for the fact that they live in dry desert conditions. They have workers that, when the times are good, will swallow sugar, they'll swallow protein, they'll swallow water, and they'll act as a store of that for the hard times. We have fire ants, which are massively successful invasive species. And of course, we have the army ants as well, which are so iconic. An incredibly diverse range of ecologies and life histories. But what is an ant? So, all ants belong to the same family, Formicidae, and there are three things that we can use to identify them. That is, workers are wingless. For a brief period in their lives, there'll be reproductives that have wings, but these do get shed pretty quickly. If you see something that's wingless, that's a key indicator that what you're looking at could be an ant. They also have elbowed antennae. So you can see here with the yellow and the orange on the antennae, you can see that there's a bit of a crook. All ants have this crook on their head. And they have nodes between their thorax and their abdomen, or gaster, here labeled petiole or postpetiole. And if you have that, all three things, what you're looking at is an ant. Does that make sense? Prove it to me. Is that an ant?
Yes.
Yeah. Elbowed antennae, waist. Absolutely right. Yeah?
Yes.
You think yes? Who thinks yes? Excellent. Yes, that is an ant. That's Lasius niger. No? Absolutely not. Absolutely. That's a termite. Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? Yes? Raise hands for yes. Raise hands for no. That is a queen ant. How do I know this? As that lovely elbowed antennae. We can't see its waist, the abdomen, from the thorax to the abdomen. But if we were to do so, we would see that it has these nodes.
Oh.
No? That is an ant. Wingless, elbowed antennae, and you can't see the petiole, but if you were to stretch it out, you would see that it has a lovely, well-developed petiole. This is Lasius niger again. I go with these because they're such a well-studied ant species. There's a huge abundance of photos. It makes it much easier. You think no? You think yes? Okay, what if I do this? What do you think? Yeah. So this is a bit tricksy of me, I'm afraid. Lacus niger, this is a male alate. Unlike the workers and the queens, their sole role is to mate with a female and then die. I mean, talk about going out with a bang, right? But you can see that they do have elbowed antennae. It's faint, but it is there. And if you were to lift the wings, you would see that they do have a petiole. So I included this just as a demonstration that while on first inspection it may look to be a wasp, just give it another couple of seconds just to see whether those antennae will elbow out, because they can just be held straight. Yes, absolutely right. Petiole, elbowed antennae, and wingless. And finally, who thinks no, who thinks yes? This is a tricky one. So saying no? Who agrees no? Thinks yes. This is actually a wingless wasp. Hasn't got the elbowed antennae. So, I appreciate that I'm really driving this point home, but it is just important to be aware. No matter how weird looking your ant, that is Colobopsis, its face is shaped like that because it actually shoves its face outside of the hole to serve as a living door. Here we have the leafcutter ant. Here we have the army ant feasting on its natural prey of researchers' hands. And here, there's a little fella. No matter how weird looking they are, as long as they have these criteria, you know you're looking at an ant. Okay, so UK ants. As I say, we estimate there are 22,000 species of ant, but we're lucky in the UK because we think there's only about 52 species native here. These belong to 4 subfamilies. These are the myrmecines, the formicines, the poneranines, and the dolichopterones. This is made easier by the fact that the poneranines and the dolichopterones are only represented by 2 rare species in the former and only 4 species in the latter. And I think 2 of those are actually invasive anyway. So, 4 subfamilies. How do we tell the difference? Well, it comes down to the nodes I discussed earlier. And this is really will be the absolute heart of identifying any UK ant. They have these petioles, and this is the petiole here, but some ants have what we call a post petiole. So that will be 2 nodes. The formicines, this will be a lot of your common species. These are things like the wood ants. These are our old friend Lacus flavus, the yellow meadow ant. They have a single petiole, and that will be well developed. So you can see there, that's their petiole. Excuse me. It's well developed, it's scale-like, it's obvious. And there isn't a post petiole there. They also don't have a functional sting. So I'm afraid I've gotten a lot more familiar with being bitten by ants over the years. So the way that these will cause me to back away from their nest is they will actually try to cut open my skin and squirt acid, formic acid, on the inside. The pupa also have cocoons, which isn't going to be too useful to you if you're trying to identify ants out in the field. But if you do what any sane man would do, you turn over nests in an effort to understand these ants better, and you see that they have cocoons, and they spawn cocoons through the process of pupation, you know that what you're looking at is probably a formicine. Contrast this with myrmecines. So these have both a petiole and a post-petiole, and you can see that on the temnothorax here as well. Petiole, post-petiole. They also have a functional sting. So if they want me to get back from the nest, they won't try to bite, they will just sting me in the hand. Myrmica rubra is actually called the European fire ant for a very good reason. It hurts. And the pupa don't have cocoons. So if you go through a nest and you see these ants here, you see the pupa yellowing before your very eyes as they develop into adults, you know that this is probably a myrmecine ant. Now, the last 2 of the subfamilies, the Panera. So they do have a single petiole, but you'll notice the petiole is very chunky. These are the only 2 species that we have in the UK, Panera coarctata and Hyperpanera punctatissima. They have the well-developed node, which will be, I think, very, very obvious to you upon observation. So I think that's probably the most straightforward way to ID this. This talk is me trying to concentrate all the knowledge from my ant books, and that always goes into things like the slit size on the 5th segment. I think this is easier. And we have the dolichopterones, which have a single petiole, and this will always be overhung by the gaster. It's very, very hard to see that lovely scale shape that we saw for the Formicetes. Okay. Something I think it's worth bearing in mind is that ants are not all created equal. They exist in different castes. So within the UK, we're lucky in this regard. We have some species, for example, leafcutter ants can have 4 castes just for workers. Most ant species in the UK have 3. And this will be the queen, this will be the workers, and this will be the male alates as well. And the reason I mention this is because it's important to appreciate, I think, the differences between the queens and the workers. On the left, we have the common black ant, L. niger. And you can see, I think if you would see that queen and those workers, you could pair them together as being to the same species. But this is Lasius flavus. And although there are differences between the Lasius flavus queen and the Lasius niger queen, I think it takes a little bit of inspection, getting in close. They're very slightly smaller and they're slightly more orange. But this contrasts with the fact that the workers are very, very clearly different from L. niger to L. flavus. So this is something to bear in mind. The queens, if you're looking at a queen, it's not going to be as straightforward using the same rules that you use for workers. Another difficulty, and I don't know how well you can see it here, this is a Myrmica rubra worker, and this is a Myrmica rubra queen. Now, you do have to get in very, very close to see a difference. It's clearer in this picture, I think. Queen, workers. This is complicated further by the fact that ants have 2 foraging strategies that we will discuss. They can be either fully claustral or semi-claustral. And what this means is that ants, once they reach a certain age, what they'll do is they'll start producing reproductives. And these will be males and females. And they will fly up into the air. They'll form these great, fantastic swarms. Flying ant day, I'm sure you've been inconvenienced by it. My father and I were opening a tent once for a family. We happened to do it over a lovely Lasius flavus colony in our garden. We were picking out dead ants for months afterwards. It was fascinating. What they'll do is they'll fly up and they'll meet up in areas. And it's amazing how well they can synchronize together to all release at the same time. And once they've mated, what will happen is the males will die. They fulfill their purpose, but the females will fall to the ground and they'll eat their wings. It's a vital protein source and they won't be using it again. They're going below the soil. Once they do that, however, there are 2 different strategies. You have the fully claustral ants who will sit there, they'll lay their first batch of eggs, and these are what we call neolithic workers. They're very, very small for a first generation, and the workers do get bigger as the colony matures. But we also have semi-claustral species, as is the case with Myrmica rubra. So what these ants do is they lay their eggs and they'll actually go out of the nest occasionally to forage and increase the resources they have. This will allow their colonies to develop. And the reason that I mention this is because I think it's worth bearing in mind that if you see a Myrmica rubra walking, there's a reasonable chance that could be a queen, particularly in certain months of the year, so early spring when they're first developing a nest. How to find ants. So, I think habitat is a really good indicator of looking at ants, and it's always something that seems to be weirdly underrepresented in the ant identification literature. But ants do have preferences for the habitat that they live in. For example, this is Lasius bruneus, and this nests and forages almost solely on trees. I have tried to give the common name for these ants wherever possible. Unfortunately, in some cases, they don't exist. So this is Lasius bruneus. Lives in the trees. If you see a colony, it kind of looks like a Niger, but it's purely on the trees. There's a reasonable chance it might actually be Bruneus. We also, as sort of discussed earlier, grasslands can be, as they age, we know there's actually a really set community difference. So in younger sites, we know that Lasius niger, the black garden ant, are really, really common. And we know that Myrmica rubra, the common red ant, is also common. But as it gets older, Myrmica sabulati actually starts to become slightly more dominant over Myrmica rubra. We also know that Lasius flavus, our old friend, they reach ecological dominance from 10 to 28 years. So if you go into a field and you see these big mounds, and it's an old semi-natural grassland, you can be fairly sure that's probably going to be a Lasius flavus, a yellow meadow ant. So ant nests are sort of the name of the game, I think. All ants in the UK form nests. These is where they concentrate their resources. If you can follow the trail back to there, you'll probably find that ant activity is based on warmth. If you want to find an ant nest, go somewhere warm. What I've always found to be a really good technique is flat rocks. Rocks are very, very good at absorbing solar radiation warming up, and if they're flat, that radiates very nicely, hasn't got far to go through before the ants below it can actually benefit from that heat. So this is a really good way to see, to find any ants. So this is something that I use a lot for Myrmica rubra and Lasius niger, the red and black ants. Just a quick discussion on mounds. This is also a dead giveaway. I can't pretend I'm not pleased with this effect. Took me longer than it should have done. We know that wood ants like to build their nests out of needles. When you see a mound made of needles, you shouldn't even need to think too hard about what that could be. Likewise, although it is true that a lot of UK ants do build mounds, Lasius flavus is the only one that builds these fantastic big mounds, the sort of thing you could trip over pretty easily and has to get included in a risk assessment form. So you can be fairly sure that if you see a lot of these mounds in high abundance, these are Lasius flavus, the yellow meadow ant that you're looking for. Okay, I did say a quick break, but I've gone through that a little faster. So any questions so far? Sam?
These elbowed antennae, have they been selected for as ants need to scurry along the ground?
We don't know why their antennae are elbowed. My personal feeling is it might be related to the fact it might be easier to localize. Ants are very, very dependent on smell. They live underground, it's a key part of their life, and they follow trails of smell. What I think it might be is it's easier to concentrate on a specific point in time if it's elbowed as opposed to trying to do it in the straight antennae. But I don't think there's any experimental evidence to prove this one way or the other. I'll be very interested to find out though. So, James.
Does there have to be, after landing or the swarm, there must be dispersal for the ants? Obviously, if they all just swim in the air, they're all the ground, and there's a lot of queens in the area, or do they winter where they actually disperse quite?
They do disperse. This isn't something they need to my knowledge, need to coordinate too much. It's when you're pretty small and you're on high up winds, you'll find that you disperse quite naturally and perhaps a bit brutally anyway. So they do tend to go quite far. I think the average is 2.5 kilometers it can be. But there are Solenopsis invicta, which mercifully we don't have in this country because that is a real fire ant. They could go as far as 10 kilometers, which is part of the reason they're such an effective invasive species. If, after a mature colony, every 10-kilometer encroachments, that's a big chunk of land over a period of time. Yeah.
Are the elbows just bent?
So the scape is solid, and there are then segments after the scape where it bends. So before the bend, that's one solid with a couple of hinges here, and then there are some segments following that. So yeah, they can move them pretty three-dimensionally. This is actually a useful ID. So I haven't got into a huge amount of detail on identifying specific species, because unfortunately in ants, a lot of it boils down to this scape is very slightly bent at this section. And I thought this would be a particularly fun talk for anyone. Sam?
Are the destinies of ants pretty much genetically locked from the go? Like a worker can never become a
So that's a really good question. Some workers can be developed into queens, but the thing about that is they'll be virgin queens. So what happens a lot is when the current mated queen dies, what we find a lot is that then the ants get fed, and they get fed a particular chemical concoction, which I'm not remembering off the top of my head at the minute. This actually causes them to develop more workers to develop into virgin queens, which means more of those genes get saved, for want of a better word, before the mound dies from lack of reproductive work.
So the workers are all female?
The workers are all female, yeah. All ants, aside from the male alates, so the ones that dive pretty quickly, are female. Cool.
If the worker was a queen,
Mm-hmm.
will only give birth to males then?
Yes, so so males are actually, it's called the haplodiploidy cycle. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, which is always a joy. But the workers produced are diploidic, and the males are haploid. And this is part of the reason Darwin was really confused by ants, because it seems strange. Why would the workers give up their own reproductive potential to rear their mother's offspring? And the reason for that is this haplodiploidic cycle, and the way that genes get transferred there. which is a whole other talk. But when I say workers turn into queens, it's perhaps not accurate to say that. It's larvae that would have turned into workers. I would say their course is diverted. So to paraphrase Sam, their destiny is not locked, it's changed over.
Well, that's the next time.
Uh,
Well, no, that's the workers. Actually, about next time.
Oh yeah, no, the nest will die. So it's just a case of getting all the reproductive potential that you can, squeezing it out of you at the last minute. And then the virgin queens go off when these nuptial flights occur, and they have a great capacity for that. So that's fine. Cool. Any other questions? Nope. Excellent. We got dangerously close to discussing the genetics there. I don't know if you saw me getting nervous, but... Okay, so a little bit about ant ecology then, by request. So ants support many different species. This can be indirectly. So for example, yellow meadow ants, they can support different plant communities as previously discussed. They do support a lot of what we call myrmecophiles, ant lovers. So we have, for example, this is Platyarthurus hoffmannseggi. This is a woodlouse. This will live in the nests of Lasius flavus. They don't seem to mind its presence too much. It'll just go through and it'll eat their detritus. I can't imagine it's much fun for them, but there we go, it's a living. We also have specialized rove beetles, and we have Claviger testaceus as well. These are just myrmecophiles that live in the nest, and they will eat the detritus, and they aren't too bothered. In terms of ecological interactions, I was asked by Steve just over a week ago about whether there were any direct relationships between plants and ants in the UK. So, for example, we do see some really interesting ones in the tropics, where plants can form these lovely specialized, what we call domatia, where they form hollow thorns. The ants live inside that. When a giraffe comes to bite down on the acacia, they rush out, they bite the giraffe, and it shows how badly their sting is that they can actually get through to a giraffe where thorns couldn't. It's actually a bit of a digression, but there's been an interesting paper about invasive ant species killing these ants that live in the thorns, and that's actually causing the hunting ecology of lions to change. And I'm so delighted about this because for years it's been the wolves changing the way that the rivers of Yellowstone change. Potentially, we could change this, so I won't have to hear about it again, which would be lovely. Nice. Yeah, so, sorry, I digress. But anyway, a few direct intimate interactions like that in the UK. But what we do have are notable interactions between trophobionts, so aphids and ants. So we have Lasius flavus, yellow meadow ant, that's feeding off the root aphid that they depend on there. We also have Formica rufa feeding on an aphid, so this will be a pine tree. This is a particular area of my expertise, but having discussed with other PhD students in my lab, apparently a reasonable way to ID Formica ants is actually the preference they have for different aphid species. So, interesting. Just a little, again, saying about how great ants are. When they're present in forestries, they actually reduce tree defoliation by up to 7%, because ants are pretty voracious. They kind of kill indiscriminately, which is why I always take a few steps back. Case of friendly fire. And yeah, when herbivores land to try and eat these trees, the ants are pretty quick in trying to make a meal of them. So we do see this effect. One thing I think I do want to talk about this close to the Polden Hills is there is a large blue butterfly that's dependent on Myrmica sabulati. So in this case, what will happen is the butterfly lays its eggs on some thyme plants. These thyme will grow and feed, and they'll actually be cared for by the ants. And once they reach their fourth instar, so for non-entomologists, exoskeletons are fantastic and incredibly useful. But one thing they don't have over a normal skeleton is that you can't stretch out of them. It's like wearing a suit of armor. So what insects will do every so often is they will molt, and they'll get a deeper, bigger suit of armor below it that will blow out, and that's how they grow. And each time they do this, we call the next one the instar, sort of the stage in life. When the caterpillars reach the fourth instar, they actually drop down to the ground. We have found some evidence they follow ant trails, and they give the impression to the ants that they are ant larvae, have somehow gone miles and miles away from the nest. And while ants are individually incredibly clever, collectively very clever, individually they're kind of easy to fool. It's totally possible to just draw a smell in a circle and they will just keep walking around that till they die. They just obey very basic instructions. So they smell a larva and they bring it back to the nest. And then Unfortunately, on the bottom left, the caterpillar below the nest actually develops into this hulking monstrosity and eats the poor ant larvae. And actually pupates underground and emerges the next year. So in this life cycle here. So butterfly on time, caterpillar goes below ground, grows, and then starts that process anew. A few interesting ant ecologies within ants. We have a couple of what we call slave species in the UK. So we have the blood red ant, steals the cocoons of the silky ant, and also Formica rufibaris. What this will means is they will actually find a nest, they'll go in, the workers of their victims will try and put up a defense, but these ants are pretty big, they're specialized in raiding these nests, and they'll go in and they'll actually collect the cocoons of these ant species and bring them back to the nest. And there, the workers that they have stolen will actually be reared to work for them. Pretty brutal, but that's nature for you. That's the first one was the main one in the UK. We do also have a second representation of this behavior. I very, very much doubt we're going to see it today. It's only been recorded in Devon and Dorset, according to Peebles. Parasites, another interesting way in which ants are horrible to one another. We have a special term for this, temporary social parasites. So I think the two best representations of that in the UK are Lasius umbratus, the yellow shadow ant, which is a fantastic name for an ant, and Lasius fuliginosus, the jet black ant. So what these will do, you can notice the head of the queen is pretty big, and this is because she'll find a colony. Once she drops off, she completes that nuptial flight, and she'll find workers of a particular species she wants to prey on, could be a Lasius niger, and she'll kill the workers as they step away from the colony. And every time she does so, she smells more and more like a Lasius niger. And at a certain point, she can go in, she can kill the queen, and she can lay her eggs. And the Lasius niger workers will think they're their queen. They'll keep looking after her as much as they were. And this means that eventually, these poor fools will notice their siblings are starting to look a lot more blonde than they used to. What's really weird about this, for me, is the fact that this ant here, the jet black ant, Lasius fuliginosus, a beautiful ant, does the same thing to Lasius umbratus, which is strange to me that something would parasitize a parasite. It's what we call a hypoparasite. The ecology seems a little strange to me, but it's not something I've looked into in great detail. We have eucolites. So these are permanent parasites. So these are just queens. They have no workers. They'll just go into a nest. They won't kill the queens, but they'll just stay there getting fed by the workers. Very rare in the UK. We only have 3 representations. And again, I very much doubt we're going to see them today on a quick walk. But if we do, fantastic. So let me stop you. Yep, so we also have what we call guest ants. So this is something that my supervisor has looked into in some depth. So what we have here is the shining guest ant. Within these lovely mounds of needles of Formica rufa, these ants live, they grow. They're considered too small to be worth bothering with by the Formica rufa, and they just survive within these mounds. So this is something I think is worth bearing in mind. If for some reason you want to get close to a wood ant mound and you see some very small ants, it's possible that you've identified this species, and that is interesting, and it is worth IDing and getting confirmation and reporting. Solenopsis Solenopsis fugax. So this is the same genus as that fire ant that I mentioned earlier. Fortunately for us, this is nowhere near as voracious or invasive. So these are thief ants. They're pretty small. What they'll do is they'll have these Formica or Lasius nests. There'll be a nest just to the side of it. They'll have small tunnels. Every so often a worker will run out, steal the larvae, and run up, hightail it before the other workers get wise and go through their narrow tunnels where they can't be followed. And then they'll snack on those larvae. So, common UK species, I'm going to suggest, I don't know how we're doing for time, so I'm going to suggest we do about 15 minutes of questions, that we all take a photo of this particular slide before we go out. I would be very surprised if we don't see at least some of the ones in green. These are very common ant species. If we're lucky, potentially we could see the 3 on the bottom as well. I haven't identified different species to a species level, because as discussed, that will involve me going to the slight hairiness of the left elbow. It's very, very specific. I think if you can identify it to this level, with any species, you'll then be able to narrow it down further to the species level. But to do that, you will need more specialist advice and ID books, which I have brought with me. So, a bit of literature, the gift that keeps on giving. Nice one. And yeah, just to reiterate as well, petiole and post-petiole, that's what we're looking for. Okay. Second talk of the day. Thank you for your patience. Any questions? Fred.
Plants that depend on ants, like cowries from the merophytes. How many of those, what diversity of the merophytes do we have in the UK?
To be honest, I don't know of any specific myrmecophytes. We do have plants that do benefits in terms of their seed dispersal from ants. And we do have some that do have lysomes, I think. So this is like a fleshy layer on the outside to motivate ants to move their seeds around. I think what I just wanted to make clear is there aren't these like really, really intimate relationships between plants and ants. A lot of it does seem to be incidental. So for example, Lasius flavus, the yellow meadow ant, there's been some research into the way that affects ecologies. And a big part of the fact is just because it's turning over soil, that different seed banks could build up, for example. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
What percentage of British ants feed off aphids?
Feed off aphids. I don't know the exact percentage. Formica rufa do, and Formica rufa, if you can identify it too. Ooh. If you can get there, that's a wood ant. There are actually 4 species that do look a bit like that. And to my knowledge, they all harvest aphids. Yes. And a lot of the Lasius species as well. So Lasius niger certainly will. Lasius flavus will harvest aphids, not above ground, so we won't be able to observe that. And I think Myrmica ruberans as well will also feed on aphids. So it's a pretty big proportion. It's why ants are so disliked by gardeners, because they keep those aphid populations strong. Yeah.
How well are ants recorded in Britain?
So this was an interesting discussion that me and Fred had. There is a scheme called Bee Wars, which is the bees, wasps, and ants recording scheme. There's a lot of good information on that. And there's also Nature Spot. It's quite useful for ID as well. I think when you say how well is it reported, do you mean as in the records exist for different ants in different areas?
Yes, yeah. Are there good records? Do you know the distribution of ants?
Yeah, so so Bee Wars is pretty good. They've got the map of the UK, and every time there's a record, it'll flash up. So that's why I know, for example, the some species are already found in Devon and Dorset, because there's no recordings of them anywhere else.
But are there many people actively recording?
To be honest, I've never met anyone actively recording ants, apart from the particular groups that I'm in. Yeah. I think actually for Rome, this would be something interesting to bear in mind, just for the bees and wasps, as well as the ants. Maybe try and integrate and pool our resources that way. I think it'd be really interesting.
There is an auto link between the other direct feeds. So any records on hymenoptera going through via Bee Wars automatically downloaded into that feeds into the end of that list. But in terms of monitoring, I think that is except under research.
Yeah.
Recording is not quite monitoring.
Okay. I mean, I'd be interested to look into this further. I think there is potential growth.
You say you're going to go around here.
Yeah, just a brief walk, just to practice some of these skills. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Do you get ants in wetlands?
Yes. Potentially. So there is, I forget its Latin name, but there is a specific black bog ant, I think. It's pretty rare. It'd be interesting to find that. I think it's a Formica of some description. So.
Is there any ant specific to the coast?
Specific to the coast, the closest I would think would be Lasius samophyllus, which, as its name suggests, is sand-loving. I think those tend to be more found more coastally. Like dunes, yeah. So But I think they are found in inland as well. Yeah, sandy heaths, exactly. So I can't think of any specific ant species that lives on a beach, for example.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the spiders that after a storm or
I mean, I'm sure on a beach, you know, with, as you say, yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure with, as you say, detritus being swept in constantly, and you know, there will be ants there in some way present. It's more, I don't think there are any species in the UK that are specifically on beaches. So, yes, Fred.
Sorry, another one.
No, keep them coming.
You spoke about inquilins for, I think,
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
When the ant nest dies, are there any sequesters?
I believe there are, yeah. So I believe that the way the inquilines work, I think very similar to a lot of the myrmecophiles, is they follow formic acid, so they can move from nest to nest. So when like the nest that they're in is dying, they can just go out above ground, smell out the next one, and then go into there as well.
But they'll be the same species.
Yeah.
Not species, but something else coming into it.
Yes. Yeah.
Ant's nest.
Yeah. I mean, a dead ant's nest, in a lot of cases, you know, a pack of soil after a while, and or potentially a big heap of needles. So you will find things in it. It's organic material, but I can't think of anything that specifically lives in there. So like woodlice, I would imagine, would like a big pile of needles, but I can't think of anything that then move in after the ants have died and then like move on afterwards.
It sounds to be a pretty toxic environment.
I would guess so. I think needles are pretty acidic, I think. So when they break down, that gets released. Yeah. Any other questions?
So are there any ants on the Somerset levels we should be particularly concerned about there?
Concerned about? To be honest, no. I mean, the records, again, are a little patchy, I think. And I think it would benefit us to have a bit more of a further idea of what's here. I've gone out with Bill and we found, you know, Lasius niger, Lasius flavus, and Myrmica rubra, as we would expect to. They're very, very common species. And we also did find Formica rufa, which was exciting, and Rodney Stoke was. Off the flat bit, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I can't think of anything that would specifically live on the Somerset levels either. And I think it would be interesting to know a little bit more about that.
It doesn't sound like
You'd be surprised. Lasius flavus can actually live in salt marshes and flooded, because their mounds can actually be, because they spend all their time below ground, there's very little openings to the nest. They actually kind of make openings as they need them and close them when they finish with them. It's not like Lasius niger, where there's a constant flow of activity from the nest to the outside world to gather resources. So they're actually pretty water resistant. I mean, the riparian grassland I worked at Fountain House does flood semi-regularly, and that hasn't stopped mounds building up in quite high densities. So there is it's called Colobobsis schmitzi, I think. Not in the UK, but it's an ant that's specific to mangroves. And it's like a swimming ant. But, you know. Anything else?
Thank you.
That's my absolute pleasure.